and also media and cultural studies. So that's where I'm sort of come from. I'm also a deputy head of school, but that's not really important here. So let's dive into the, it's not working.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to, perfect. Yeah. My research is primarily in digital health. I have been studying illness narratives, illness communities on social media. And then I have a long-standing interest in methodological experimentation, doing research in new ways and doing research in perhaps also more participatory ways. I've been studying young cancer patients' use and experience of social media. I'm doing a project on shame and young fitness self-trackers at the moment. Also a project on self-organized patient communities on social media. And then I'm embarking on a project on pre-patient narratives and genetic self-testing in 2023. What I will be presenting here today is a project that explores how, when, and why shame in its various and complex forms is present in the life of people with a chronic condition. And the results I'm sharing is really based on a very participatory research design that invited people with a chronic condition to share or crowdsource their everyday stories of shame. The whole process was developed in a very sort of close collaboration with a patient community. The founders and moderators of that community was involved in the process. We designed it together. We designed the questions together. The community is called Chronic Influencers, kroniske influencer på dansk. They have now around 10,000 members on Instagram and around 4,000 members on Facebook. And they try to gather people with a chronic condition. So it's really a broad, very broad community, but that's sort of their criteria for sharing stuff on the profiles. The invitation to share these stories of shame were distributed on their 2 social media profiles. And then people could share by writing comments to these invitations on the platform. They could send me an email, or they could answer a survey that terminated this process. And I see it very much as a project that tries to sort of move science into the public, that tries to sort of engage the people that you're studying instead of simply looking at them, trying to do research with them. So that's sort of the overall framework. That also means that the paper or the presentation aims to create knowledge on 2 levels. I'm interested in the particular shame experiences of the followers, trying to understand them. But also in the participatory research process itself. What does it create or produce to have this moment of public sharing of shame stories? How do people experience that? Is that of value to them? So there's like a double aim to the paper. So I'm asking, how is the relation between shame and chronic conditions articulated by the participants in the study, but also how do the participants perceive the effects and implications of sharing shame stories on the social media profiles of a peer-led patient community? Just a few more words on the method. I think you can divide it into 3 phases. A first phase focusing on contact and planning. Actually, this patient community contacted me. It was not me asking to research them. They contacted me. I think coincidentally, were part of the same newspaper article, and then they started looking at my research, and then they asked me if I wanted to do a collaboration with them. So we met, we discussed what could be an issue of shared interest, and decided to do this theme week on shame. And they do a lot of theme weeks where they try to sort of raise issues that that have relevance to the followers. So they have theme weeks on loneliness or sexuality. So in that way, the theme week was just in a way yet another theme week on a relevant topic. What was new was that we were crowdsourcing material for research as well, that it would go into journal articles as well. The theme week on shame was held on the first week of June in 2020, where 5 posts or invitations to share stories were distributed across the week. After that week, we entered a phase more focused on evaluation and creating feedback loops. I archived all the shared material, started coding it. Preliminary findings were shared. I did a very sort of preliminary presentation of some of the results on the platform. The founders were very sort of focused on giving back to the community, that we couldn't just leave them after crowdsourcing all this material, that we would have to sort of feedback into the community and let people know what we were doing and what we were finding out. And then we planned further collaboration, which was actually recently funded in this research project dealing with peer-organized social media communities. So the collaboration is continuing in that sense. In the theme week, just to give you an impression of what we were asking people to share, we invited people to share memories of particular shameful situations in relation to having a chronic illness. We asked them to share stories about the gazes or the people the followers could feel shame in front of. We were also asking questions about the role of social media. Being a media researcher, I was also interested in that dimension. In terms of intensifying or decreasing shame. We were also asking questions about experiences that had reduced shame. And then on the final day of the theme week, we shared a link to a survey, which allowed people to share their stories in a more like a hidden way. I think some people didn't want to write a comment or write an email to me, but could then share stories in the survey. But it was also intended to evaluate the theme week. What was sort of the how did the followers perceive the value of this theme week and of sharing shame stories collectively. All in all, the material produced was 170 user comments on Instagram and Facebook. 20 people wrote longer emails to me about their experiences. 178 people responded to the entire survey. And in that survey, more than 400 open text answers delivered material to the study as well. A very important aspect of this, and maybe also of doing participatory research, is that you can't really control who contributes. And when looking into the survey, it was really clear that this was not a very broad group of chronic patients. It was primarily female followers. More than 90% were female. Most of them were between 25 and 55 years old. And they had a chronic condition linked to the musculoskeletal system, various types of arthritis, chronic pain, and whiplash syndrome. So yeah, so maybe the results is more really connected to that segment of chronic patients than this very broad category. The ethics of doing it, for me, doing it research in that participatory way is also a way of ensuring the ethics and the relevance of what you're doing. The founders had the opportunity to co-decide the theme and the research process itself. Of course, all invitation posts were clearly marked with a section about the aim of the research, ethics, anonymization, and researcher contact. Consent forms were shared with the people who contacted me via email. Everything was, of course, explicitly marked as voluntary, and people who wanted to participate in a more anonymous way could then take advantage of the survey. And doing these feedback loops would, for me, also be part of an ethical practice. I actually didn't like presenting the results so soon. It was only a month after we sort of crowdsourced the material, and I did these sort of preliminary patterns, but I was not really sure what was I was sort of giving back to the community. But they were really sort of, now you have to sort of give something back so that people know what we are doing. And then for me, that is also an ethical practice, losing a little bit of a control as a researcher, and giving back instead of constantly trying to control or create these very systematic processes. That also means that everything becomes very messy. The material is extremely messy. I lost control over the process, I would say. I lost control over how much material was collected. I lost control over who contributed to the process. In a way, I also lost control over the scientific problem. I thought that I was investigating chronic patients, but maybe it turned out that I was investigating a very sort of limited segment of chronic patients. The method also makes it very difficult to systematically account for who the participants are. I don't know that. People share things in comments. Some people share something in the survey. I don't know if they both shared comments and answered the survey. So I have this rough estimate that around 200 people participated in the study, but I can't make a list of the participants. So again, a messiness created by doing research in this more participatory way. Great. In the analysis, I drawed on 3 lines of existing shame research. I took an interest in which particular real or imagined gazes or relations that motivated shame, as it was articulated in the material. I took an interest in how shame is linked to and possibly also reveals disturbed relational attachment. And maybe also how shame can mobilize people into political, social action and reflection, drawing more on a cultural studies approach to shame with Tompkins, Probin, Salimont, people like that. And then also I still think, relatively limited research on illness, health, and shame, trying to offer an account of the complex shame dynamics of people with a chronic condition. Okay, moving into the material, that was all the framework. In the survey, we could see that actually 70% indicated that they felt shame in relation to their chronic condition on a daily or a weekly basis. So in that sense, shame seemed to be a relevant emotion or affect to dive into. And the following analysis here will not sort of exhaust all the material. I will try to sort of focus on 3 key insights or 3 patterns in the material. It's very clear that shame experiences are very much linked to moments of energetic bodily failure in the material. It's very much about not having the energy that you would like to have, not being able to do normal stuff, being tired, being slow, being non-vital in many ways. To my surprise, shame was very much relationally linked to the intimate sphere. I had an idea, maybe because of the existing research, that it would be very much about public authorities, the medical encounter, that shame would be produced in the interface between the patient and the system. It was very much about the family. It was very much about intimate relations, feeling shame in relation to your children, your partner, your friends. The public authorities, they were in there, but it was just much more about families and these more intimate relations. And then I want to focus on the finding that the research process itself seemed to politicize shame in different ways. I think it de-individualized shame for many of the participants. At least that comes across in the survey, that they have the experience of suddenly having sense that I'm not alone in this, that people out there have similar experiences. But they also had a chance to contest it. A lot of people thought that shame was not at all relevant. Why was I asking a stupid question like that? Because shame was not at all part of their life as a chronic patient. So it also created a space of contestation where people could actually object and say, this is not at all relevant to my life and experiences. Okay. As I said, a majority link shame to the experience of either having a body that fails, a body that is slower or weaker than what could be expected, or being a burden to society, or a personal social network due to their bodily weaknesses. One of the participants explained it like this. She said, I'm doing my very best, but I constantly feel that I'm drowning. I rarely have the energy to take part in social events, and I have lost friends on that account. I constantly have to be aware of my energy level. I suffer from fatigue, and I constantly forget things. On a daily basis, I'm ashamed of the things I would like to do, but cannot do. It's hard. So I think in the material, shame is repeatedly linked to various forms of bodily dysfunction, not being able to remember, having a disease that could cause premature birth is also mentioned, but also to mismatches between desired bodily capacities and actual bodily capacities, that you would like to do stuff with your body that you're not able to do. So shame is very much framed as an energetic bodily failure. The body does not have the energy and the capacities that the participants would like it to have. Yeah, so in a sense, I would say shame is articulated as related to not being able to live up to energetic ideals linked to particular social roles and categories. So there would be ideas about what a mother is able to do, what a partner is able to do, and not having the energy to do that is articulated as linked to shame or as a shameful experience by the participants. So in that way, shame is not a shame over being excessive, being too much, being weird or whatnot. It's actually about being too little, not alive enough in a sense. And the participants, I would say, describe not only having bodies that are too easily affected by their activities, they become tired too quickly, but also how they themselves are not effective enough in terms of making a presence in the world. They become too tired too quickly, and they cannot affect other people. They're not doing what they're supposed to do in the home or in society or at the workplace. So across the material, shame is really explored or explained as the experience of being witnessed and as an energetic and effective failure in terms of both too much sensitivity towards the world and too little impact on the world, not being alive and vital enough. Another pattern would be the one linked to shame and the intimate sphere. Because across the material, various forms of shame-inducing cases are articulated, but some are mentioned more often than others. Authorities are mentioned. It is mentioned how they can cause shame if they meet the chronically ill with mistrust or with the desire to squeeze him or her into predefined systems. One said, I feel shame towards the municipal system when I'm once again unable to work and I don't fit into any of their boxes. Another one said that the hospital doctor keeps on saying that I need to go back to school and has written in my journal that she has tried to motivate me to do that. I don't even have the energy to take a shower more than once a week. So shame in relation to public authorities are present in the material, but shame primarily seems to be located in the intimate sphere, stemming from gazes of people that the participants love and by whom they want to be loved. So there's a connection between shame and love, I would say, in the material. And there I would draw more on the work maybe of Elspeth Probyn, Sylvan Tompkins, that says that shame really relies on positive interest, that you can't feel ashamed or shameful in relation to people you don't care about. So positive interest has to be sort of at the bottom of a shameful experience. So in a way, you could say that shame is highly linked to disturbed intimate attachment, and also reveals the ideals and the relations in which the participants are invested. They want to be a good partner, they want to be a good parent, they want to be a good friend, but they can't. So shame also, I would say, reveals these disturbed investments, that they have positive investments in people, but they feel blocked in that investment. In the survey, friends, partners, family in general, and children are marked as the relations that most often cause or are the scene for shameful experiences. One participant said it like this: because I feel, explaining her shame, because I don't feel that I can be the mother that I want to be, and that I think she, the child, deserves. I can't live up to my own expectations and the things that I know are best for a child. Shame in relation to partners are also mentioned quite a lot, and mentioned in both a relatively abstract and a very practical way. I think shame is in a way linked to not living up to the contract that you feel that you have with your partner, that you had planned all sorts of things, living a particular type of life, and then suddenly you're lying there completely tired on the couch all the time. So there's this idea of somehow being disappointing in relation to the overall logic and contract of the partnership. And then sort of like practical things are mentioned quite a lot, that one leaves the partner with a lot of work, a lot of responsibility, which should ideally be shared. So they feel that they disappoint in terms of the overall contract, but also in terms of these everyday practical activities. One of the very few men in the material explained it like this: I feel ashamed that I can't be the father and the husband I want to be, that I'm more absent, grumpy, and impatient than I'd like to be, and that I have to leave such a big part of the practical work to my wife. In relation to friends and peers, shame seems to be more linked to being a socially unpredictable individual. Someone who has to leave social events early, suddenly lay down on the sofa, postpone, cancel meetings at the last minute, someone who needs extra arrangements and attention to be able to take part in social life, or needs to be for forgetting important aspects of being a good friend. So there's more like an aspect of being unpredictable, needing extra attention all the time when it comes to shame in relation to a broader social network of friends. In the survey, we can see that 7 out of 10 participants indicate that shame has actually changed over time, that shame is a dynamic emotion. And this change can take very many forms, as it is expressed in the survey. Shame can, for instance, increase with the arrival of a chronic condition or diagnosis. However, more participants also indicate that shame has decreased over time. For instance, after getting a diagnosis that actually explains why you are behaving the way you are, and as people learn to live with and accept their condition and see them as worthy individuals despite their illness. One participant articulated it in that way: I don't feel as much shame as earlier. I think it's because I've settled more in my role. For instance, I felt an enormous amount of shame due to my lack of contribution to society. Now I'm contributing by being a fantastic aunt, by being a friend and a positive person, and that's good enough. When people should try to explain what has sort of alleviated shame, how can shame be decreased, then self-acceptance, the support of partners and the network, open dialogues about illness, and peer contact with peer communities are really mentioned as sort of the most prominent road to overcoming or coping with shame. How much time do I have left? 10 minutes, 8, something like that? Yeah, great. People in the material, maybe not surprisingly, as we're doing the study on social media, seem to have a relatively positive approach to what social media can offer to chronic patients. 7 out of 10 in the survey indicate that they use social media to communicate or read about illness on a daily or weekly basis. 8 out of 10 follow the personal narratives of other individuals with a chronic condition. And reading about others in the same situation as oneself is mentioned as an important way of overcoming shame by 65% of the respondents. The theme week evaluated relatively in a relatively positive way. According to the respondents, these processes of sharing shame stories can maybe strengthen the community, can facilitate people with a chronic condition coming together to fight shame, and decrease the level of shame on an individual level by experiencing it as a more collectively shared affect. So they seem to find value in this process of publicly sharing and publicly reading the shame stories of other patients as well. Another important aspect of the material, I think, in a way, you could say that the political side of it is that you can suddenly see that you're not alone. It's a process of de-individualization, that you move from thinking, oh, I'm the only person in the world feeling like this, to suddenly seeing that there's a lot of other people sharing a different but similar experience. But how I would also say shame is also political on a different level, as the theme week also allows the relevance of shame to be discussed and contested as relevant for understanding the life of people with chronic conditions. Some of the participants don't acknowledge that shame is relevant at all. One of them says, I have a chronic condition full time, 16 physiological diagnosis, and my 1-year birthday on disability pension. I'm not in any way ashamed of this, and I'm grateful to be able to take care of and nurture my health and keep the healthcare system running. Another type of contestation focuses more on the fact that, yes, negative effects or emotions are relevant, but it's not really about shame. It's about other types of responses. Frustration is mentioned, insufficiency, fury, guilt, sadness, embarrassment, irritation, loneliness, and sorrow are sort of alternatives mentioned in the material also. And I actually find that relatively valuable that people can also get a chance to say, this is, imposing shame as a relevant emotion on us is not the right thing to do. There are other emotions that are more relevant, or maybe people don't feel negative emotions in relation to their illness as all. So it creates a space of contestation and political debate as well. Yeah, so I think trying to sum up that shame is explained as a painful emotion and experience in the material. It is linked to exclusion, to moments of failure, but following Tompkins and Probin, it also seems to be intertwined with and a result of a desire for social bonds and connections that are disturbed or broken somehow. A different analysis would maybe also stress the social production of shame. You could also look at the material through the lens of maybe most like a biopolitical critique, focusing on the fact that current health cultures are built on the ideal of personal health responsibility and on a belief that belief in the individual's rational ability to control and steer the body towards a state of health. And at least for me, that explains a little bit. I think self-scrutinization is really present in the material. People seem to doubt their own evaluations constantly. They are saturated by this experience of living with an unfixable disease that they can't get out of, but still having to face constant processes of self-scrutinization around issues relating to willpower, energy, and potential laziness. One of the participants explains that she often reflects on how to draw the boundary between I'm not able to and I'm not trying hard enough. Am I really too ill to create a perfect home, to go to the playground, to work more hours, etc.? Or am I just lazy and not tough enough? So I think these questions of, is it me? Is this actually my fault? Seems to haunt many of the participants in the study. So in that way, shame in the materialist should not only, I think, be treated as a kind of a distorted positive interest, or as produced in encounters with evaluating gazes. I think it also stresses the need to critically address biopolitical health cultures that enable shameful patienthood and constant self-inspection by reproducing discourses of patient responsibility and health as choice somehow. I think that framework of responsibility and choice is also what creates all these self-scrutinizations and self-doubts. Great. Let's end it there. I think it's more or less time for a discussion. I just want to, the conclusion is, I think the paper has shed light on some of the complex roles that shame plays in the lives of people with one or more chronic conditions. The crowdsourced material shows that a majority of the participants experience shame in relation to their illness on a daily or weekly basis. Other findings are that shame among chronically ill people seems to stick to energetic failures of the body, that shame is predominantly produced in the intimate sphere, and that shame can be politicized when it is shared and discussed among peers. So I think the collective storytelling process in this paper can also be seen as an attempt to weaken the force of shame on an individual level, as providing a space where we can understand and explore the more sort of experiential complexities, but also the potential irrelevance of shame in the everyday lives of people with a chronic illness, but maybe also as an opportunity to critically discuss health cultures based on a problematic responsibilization of citizens. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for this really fascinating talk. We now move on to the questions. If anyone in the room has, same for the people on Zoom, please write in the chat whatever questions you may have.
Thank you. That was very interesting. Okay. Okay. I'm interested in this question that recurred through. Okay, thanks. This question that recurred throughout the talk, and it's the question of the audience or the honor group. That's the way it gets discussed in the philosophy of emotions literature. You know, it goes back to ancient Greece, and it's one of the reasons why anthropologists and classicists say shame is a pre-modern emotion, that it relies on there being a defined honor group, and that when you fall short of the expectations of the honor group, then you feel shame. Then, of course, the discussion is that how does shame emerge, and it ties into, you know, something someone said in one of the questions after my talk was about the heteronomy versus autonomy discussion about shame. You know, whether shame is a heteronomous emotion that you need an audience in order to judge you, or whether it's an autonomous. And one of the arguments I made was that actually that collapses in on itself, that discussion. So I was thinking then, so I thought you gave some really good examples of that, and I was thinking of some examples from the work I do on HIV. So you don't need an audience, you don't need an actually existing honor group anymore. But in some senses, the language is enough. And I thought some of the examples you gave were, people falling short of what the meaning of a father. And we have terms like, he's a poor father, or he's an absent father, or she's a poor mother, or an absent mother, or and those distinctions people are aware of, and they recognize that they might fall, in the eyes of others, they might fall into one of those categories: a poor father, an absent mother, or their children are always dirty or never turned out well for school and things like that. So these definitions that exist in the grammar of the language operate like an honor group. And so people feel, people can feel they're falling short of certain standards without anybody having to tell them they're falling short, just in terms of their awareness of these grammatical distinctions in the language. So I just wondered how you thought about that, Bill.
I think you thought more about it than me. So, but that's often how it is with questions, right? Yeah, at least you could see that the manifest audience is not necessary at all. Actually, when people describe these particularly shameful situations, they are actually quite abstract. It's not about that moment where someone at the playground told me that I was a bad mother or looked at me in a particular way. It's very much an imagined gaze stemming from culture somehow, right? And linked to these social categories. But I guess the audience is still there in a cultural sense, right? It's not about that concrete encounter, but it's still about, yeah, the potential, maybe also the potential of shameful encounters. That's, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carsten, for sharing these fascinating findings. So I have one question regarding a claim you made concerning the link between love and shame, because I thought you seemed to formulate it rather strongly, and I'm very much in agreement with the idea that the feeling of shame testifies to the importance of social bonds, that it somehow reveals a very fundamental need for recognition, and perhaps that could be played out in the thought that if there are people that we really deeply despise, their condemning gaze is probably not going to be super shame-inducing. But I just think there's a difference between talking of this fundamental need for recognition and then saying what I thought you were saying, that I mean, you really need to love the person in order to be shamed by him or her. And I mean, one of the cases you mentioned also, I think, seems to go against that. I mean, the case you had with the doctor who was suggesting that the patient ought to go to school seemed to kind of be, that comment seemed to be shame-inducing. I mean, I can see again why the patient might somehow have a certain need for the recognition from the doctor, but to claim that he or she loved him or her, I mean, it also seems a bit weird. So could you kind of clarify a little bit this link between love and shame?
Yeah. I think I'm not trying to claim that deep love is at the bottom of every shameful experience, but I think I needed a framework for understanding why shame seem to linger more in these relations that were also about love. Why the children, why the partner? Because you would think, okay, that's where people are acknowledged, that's where they are accepted, that's where they are loved. And there, I guess I was very inspired by the Tompkins tradition, by the Probin tradition, that really, begins by positive interest, saying that shame relies on some sort of positive interest, and that in a way also goes for the doctor, right? I need to be in some sort of a constructive relationship with this person, right? And I think they would say the more positive interest you have in a particular relation, the more shameful it could actually become when that relation is disturbed or broken somehow, right? And maybe also because some of these relations are they are lasting, longer lasting in a sense. The relation to the doctor is more acute. It's an acute form of shame arising in that particular situation. But yeah, the other relations are simply more important and therefore feel more shameful when they're not not working. So maybe, yeah, it's not about claiming that love is always at the bottom of it, but maybe love can intensify the potential for these relational ruptures that create shame. Yeah, that would be my. I feel like a giraffe constantly sort of trying to I'll move closer to the microphone. Yeah.
Oh, thank
Sorry.
you very much for your presentation. I have a question that partly relates to what what you were just answering. So maybe, Ramis, I don't know enough about this literature on shame, but for me, your research kept raising the question of what about guilt? Because to me, all these examples, when people say I'm ashamed of not being a good father, maybe it's I'm Italian and my native language is Italian, and I wouldn't say in Italian mi vergogno di, I have shame. I would say I feel guilty. I have a sense of guilt. Yeah. And I wonder whether these findings you find with the question of love, it's because in the context of family, we have this sense that we have to live up to certain standards, we have to be good fathers and mothers. So that has more to do with I feel guilty that I cannot live up to being a good father and mother. So yeah, for me, there was this conflation between being ashamed, the gaze of the other that is making me ashamed of some features, but also the sense of guilt, which I thought your data were talking to. So I don't know if that's an important distinction to make, because I was thinking also, why is it that what I might want to call guilt is with people who feel guilty, they look for these social interactions where partly might be because people tell you, look, it's not your fault, and that makes you feel a bit better.
Yeah, I think the distinction between guilt and shame is really, really important. But I think I would go with the commonsensical definition that guilt is more linked to actions, having the feeling of having done something wrong, while shame would be more about feeling like a failure, feeling globally flawed. I think that's a formulation you've used, Dan, that it's more linked to your personality, who you are, your identity. And I think that's really how they frame it. My identity as a mother is failed. It's not about I forgot the lunch package this morning. It's not these concrete actions. It is like a global sense of failing as a identity, as a person belonging to a particular category. And I think for me, that would make shame more relevant than guilt. That would for me be more action orientated, linked to specific practices that you can feel guilty over. Yeah, but would you have a different definition of what guilt is, or is that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I didn't make it up. I think it's a relatively standard standard definition, but maybe it's also, yeah. But would you say was it an Italian context that does guilt work in a different way? Is it? Yeah.
Not living up to standards, so
okay. So guilt would also be about my identity, my personality, my reputation.
Yeah.
And not about specific actions.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, maybe there's a difference to explore there.
I wonder.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Carsten. That was a really interesting talk and a really interesting methods that you used. I thought that was a brilliant idea. Obviously people are sometimes able to repair, move out of shame through connection with other people, having their experiences validated, normalized, and actually you were able to do that as part of the research, and yet you also gave people the option to send you information privately as well. I thought I wish I'd thought of that way of investigating shame. But my question is, I noticed you said, I think it was 96% were women who'd taken part. So I was curious about that. And I was just wondering, do you know And whether the invitation to take part was shared in places where women were more likely to see it, or does that indicate that there really is a difference in men and women's preparedness to take part in something like this?
Yeah, I think it's very much about the particular group that shared the invitations. I don't even think that the moderators were aware that almost all the followers were women. So I think there are just a lot of women in these patient communities. I can see it in other projects. And if it has to do with illness and disease and you want to interview people, a lot of women want to talk about that. And I'm rarely able to find men able to engage in that discussion, or I have to insist somehow that's relevant. The only exception is the project I did on fitness and muscles. There, it was a relatively even share between men and women wanting to participate in the survey. I'm a little afraid of sort of reproducing really boring ideas about men and women wanting to share and wanting to talk about more vulnerable aspects. But that would sort of be my only explanation now. I don't know, would you have any idea about why that difference is so big? Is that part of your work, or?
I mean, those, like you say, those are the most obvious explanations and what it feels sort of acceptable to do as a man or a woman. But yes, I mean, it could be that these are forums that are already very kind of feminized, and already there's a norm for women talking with other women. I wasn't sure.
I think that would be a little bit of a barrier for many men to engage in these particular groups. I think there is like a feminized aesthetic to it in some sense, but I think actually it cuts across also other types of groups. I'm doing a study on a Facebook group for people with chronic pain, and there it's the same, but without the aesthetics. It's just in a sense a very neutral Facebook group, but women seem again to be more willing to share and interact in the group. I also did a study on young cancer patients and their use of social media. It was the same. I couldn't really find a lot of young men that wanted to participate in the study. And when I interviewed them, we had some very long, embarrassing, silent procedures, you know. And sometimes I found out that they hadn't sort of articulated it anywhere before. I was sort of like the first person that they engaged with in a longer discussion about their illness, right? So, but yeah, certainly an important aspect there. One more question, yeah.
I mean, this is a fascinating discussion, and I think on Twitter, Barry had one of the comments for one of the scholars on why women tend to share experiences, whereas men don't. And my take is patriarchy, I guess, maybe. Or, I mean, the way the emotions, how people share, especially women share in a very public forum. But again, going back to the follow-up question is on the gendered narratives within your, again, I was curious with it. And then one of the key finding, if I want to draw, is about the intimate sphere where you said the shame is much more openly there. Would you make it as a claim, or is it based on your respondents? Because here the participants, I mean, I'm just thinking again, the more the way the narratives is built and the conclusion that is a theoretical conclusion you're drawing upon is an intimate sphere, the shame as. Would you really draw it as a generalized normative idea, or would you say it is just very specific to this group of people? Yeah, thank you.
Maybe where the non-philosophers, I'm an empirical researcher, I would say what's in the material I studied there, and then I would say, could we generalize this? But I would never sort of, based on a relatively small sample, try to fix what shame is and the relationship between shame and gender. So I would be much more interested in letting the empirical material speak than defining large concepts. That's your job. Yeah. Some of you at least. Yeah. Great. Time's up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Now we have a pause for lunch, and we'll see you again here in 1 hour.